I had always felt a comfortable solitude in my old family home, a place full of memories, creaking floorboards, and the subtle hush of age. That late autumn evening, as I sat alone in the living room with only the soft glow of a single lamp to break the darkness, I began to wonder if the quiet was perhaps a little too quiet. The wind outside rattled against the window panes and rain drummed on the roof, but there was something else, a series of faint, deliberate thumps echoing from above. At first, I assumed it was merely the settling of an old house against a chill night. I had spent the afternoon cleaning and organizing, and maybe the temperature drop had caused the wood to contract. But as minutes turned to hours, the thumping grew more insistent. Every so often, I would pause mid-sip of my lukewarm tea and strain to listen, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching. I remembered childhood warnings about the attic. My mother once told me, with a half smile that was meant to gently tease, "Don't ever go up there after dark, dear. Some secrets are better left forgotten." At the time, I'd laughed it off. But now, alone in this vast, creaking house, those old tales of a restless presence lurking among dust and forgotten relics began to feel all too real. I tried to distract myself by flicking through an old photo album. The images of sunlit days and smiling faces did little to quiet the rising tension. Instead, an icy dread crept over me every time I caught a sound, a soft rustling in the ceiling, a scrape as if an object were dragging along the beams. I could almost swear I heard a whisper, indistinct yet laden with a meaning I couldn't fathom. After what felt like an eternity, I stood and approached the narrow doorway that led to the attic. The door, painted a faded pale blue, hung slightly off its hinges. Its peeling paint and age-worn brass handle gave it an aura of melancholy abandonment. I hesitated at its threshold, half expecting to hear something from within, maybe a rasping voice or even the quiet sound of a sob. Instead, there was only silence. I flicked on my cell phone's flashlight and, with trembling hands, pushed open the door. A burst of stale, dust-laden air enveloped me as the old wooden stairs creaked under my weight. I climbed slowly, each step punctuated by the echo of my rising heartbeat. The atmosphere grew thicker the higher I ascended, a mix of despair, hidden grief, and a sense of foreboding that prickled at the back of my neck. At the top of the stairs, I paused at the narrow entryway. The attic revealed itself in weak, spectral light that streamed through a grimy window. Boxes, old furniture shrouded in yellowing sheets, and cobweb trinkets filled the space, each relic a silent witness to the passage of time. Yet, in the far corner of the room, I sensed movement, a dark, indistinct shape that didn't belong among the dusty antiques. I aimed the beam of my phone's light at the shape. For an instant, the darkness receded, and I saw nothing but shadows. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it reappeared. My breath caught in my throat. There, standing in the dim haze near a battered mirror, was a figure as vague as smoke. Its form was human enough, shoulders stooped, head slightly bowed, but its eyes were the most unnerving part. Deep, hollow voids that seemed to blink in and out of existence, as if they were trying to tell me a secret. I froze on the spot, my mind racing. Was this a trick of the light? Had my imagination, fueled by too many late-night horror movies, finally gotten the better of me? The figure did not move, yet I felt as though its gaze bore into the very soul of my being. Every instinct urged me to run down the stairs, to retreat back to the safety of the living room, but a deeper, inexplicable compulsion held me there. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper floated through the stagnant air. I couldn't make out the words, but they carried a weight that pressed against my chest like a physical burden. I know you." The sound seemed to say, trailing off into a faint wail that mingled with the moan of the wind outside. It wasn't a familiar voice, and it filled me with a primal terror that I had long thought belonged only in nightmares. I wanted to call out, to demand that the presence show itself or speak clearly, but the sound died in my throat. Instead, I stood in that oppressive silence, paralyzed by the intensity of my own fear and the weight of the unknown. In that moment, every creak of the wood and every exhale of the wind sounded like a deliberate message, a coded invitation to confront something buried deep within the house history, or perhaps within my own troubled memories. Gathering every ounce of courage, I stepped forward into the center of the attic. The beam of my light wavered as my hand trembled uncontrollably. I moved closer to the mirror, where the figure seemed most concentrated, and in its reflection I caught a glimpse of something more, a flash of an old photograph pinned crookedly to the wall behind it. I couldn't tell at first, but as I drew near, I recognized it as a portrait of a solemn young woman with sorrowful eyes. A date scrawled at the bottom read 1912. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces began to merge in my mind. My grandmother had once told me stories of a tragic occurrence in this house, a long ago death, a mysterious loss, and a promise that the spirit of the departed would forever roam the upper floors, seeking recognition and closure. Had I unwittingly provoked this specter simply by setting foot in the very place where it once lived? Or was it that the presence had lain dormant, waiting for me, the new occupant, to stir it awake? The atmosphere thickened, and the air grew colder. The figure in the mirror began to shift imperceptibly, its form elongating and contracting as if struggling against some unseen force. I could now distinctly see a pair of lips part in a silent plea, and in that fleeting moment, a torrent of images flooded my mind. Memories of a life before a sudden, inexplicable tragedy, the sound of laughter silenced by sorrow, the echo of footsteps in an empty corridor, and a desperate cry for help that went unanswered. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity toward me. I felt as though it was not merely an image, but a presence, a being desperate to make contact. I took a cautious step back, my entire body trembling as if iced over. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from both nowhere and everywhere, it whispered, "Remember. Please remember." I stared at the words, caught between disbelief and terror. What did it mean? Was it pleading for recognition of a forgotten history, a forgotten name? Was it warning me of a danger that loomed over this place? My mind churned with questions, and each creak of the ancient wood felt like an answer I was too afraid to hear. The oppressive silence broke with a sudden, harsh sound, a loud thump behind me that resounded through the attic like a final, ominous drum. I spun around, heart in my throat, only to see the heavy shadow of a large trunk sliding slightly across the floor. Nothing else moved, yet the echo of that sound reverberated within me. In that charged instant, I recognized that this was not a figment conjured by my overactive mind. It was real. This presence was real. I fumbled with my phone and managed to record a few seconds of what I could only describe as a low, mournful hum that emanated from the very walls of the attic. The sound was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a dirge for forgotten souls. As the recording continued, I saw the figure gradually recede, melting back into the surrounding gloom as if it had never been there at all. Before I could decide on my next course of action, a clatter upstairs startled me from the recording's trance. The sound of heavy footsteps, deliberate and echoing, trailed from above. I glanced toward the only door leading further into the darkness, a narrow doorway that I'd always assumed led only to storage or old bedrooms. Now it pulsed with an eerie, inviting glow. With each beat of my heart, I felt the pull of an unseen force urging me to follow the sound. Against every instinct screaming at me to flee, I moved toward that door. My hand brushed against cold, peeling wallpaper that seemed almost to tremble in anticipation. I pushed the door open slowly, and a new corridor revealed itself, a long, narrow passage lined with faded photographs and dust-covered relics. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, until they almost drowned out my own panicked breathing. I forced myself forward, using the beam of my phone to guide my steps. Every door along the corridor was slightly ajar, as though each one carried a secret waiting to be unveiled. At the far end, I discovered a door that was slightly different from the rest. Its surface was smudged with streaks of dark, dried blood. I couldn't tell if it was real or merely the play of shadows, but it filled me with a cold, aching dread. With trembling determination, I pushed it open. Inside was a small room that looked more like a forgotten study than part of the main house. A single, time-worn desk stood in one corner, and above it, on the wall, hung an ornate mirror in an intricately carved frame. The air in that room was even colder than the corridor, and it seemed to vibrate with the echoes of the past. There, at the desk, lay a battered leather journal with yellowed pages. I picked it up, the weight of it sending a shiver down my spine. As I opened the journal, a message was scrawled across the first page in shaky, desperate handwriting. I am trapped in these walls. Remember me. They took everything, my name, my love, my life. The faded ink and the style of the letter suggested a century-old sorrow, a tragedy that had long been buried. At that moment, I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on the back of my neck that made my skin crawl. I spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The silence was absolute, as if the very air had held its breath. I clutched the journal to my chest, unsure if it was a warning, a plea, or a confession. Then came another whisper, clearer this time, and almost pleading. Help me. The voice was soft, yet imbued with immense sorrow. It tugged at my very soul as if it were a part of me long forgotten. I stepped forward, unable to resist any longer, and placed a trembling hand on the cold wall. In that contact, I felt a surge of emotions, pain, loss, and an overwhelming loneliness that mirrored my own isolation. It was as if the ghost of that lost soul reached out, desperate for acknowledgement, for someone to remember its existence. For what seemed like hours, I stood there in that small study, oscillating between terror and empathy. The whispers continued intermittently, sometimes a soft murmur, sometimes a desperate cry. I could not tell if they were coming from the walls, the floorboards, or the very air itself. All I knew was that something in this house had been broken long ago, and now the damage was not confined to wood and dust, but to the fragile remnants of human hearts. The storm outside reached a fevered pitch, and lightning illuminated the room in jagged bursts. In one such flash, I saw a glimpse of a face in the mirror above the desk, a face drawn with heartbreak and despair. In that split second, I understood that the specter was not my enemy, but a wounded soul reaching out for release. The diary and the shattered reflections were fragments of a history steeped in forgotten pain, a life that had been taken away by circumstances too terrible to bear. I resolved then to do something. I had to remember. I had to honor the plea of this unseen presence by discovering its story, by piecing together the fragments of a long-forgotten tragedy. I dashed down the corridor back to the living room, clutching the journal as if it were a lifeline, and started to search through the house for clues, old letters tucked behind faded wallpaper, photographs hidden under loose floorboards, and even records of local deaths archived in a dusty family cabinet. Every discovery deepened the mystery. I found an old newspaper clipping from 1912 detailing a bitter tragedy. A young woman, known only by her first name, Eleanor, had vanished mysteriously after a scandalous affair within this very house. Rumors had swirled for years, whispers of betrayal, sorrow, and a restless spirit left behind. The journal's writing mirrored the style of those days, and the despair was unmistakable. As the night wore on, I felt the presence drawing nearer. Shadows crept along the walls, and I could sense the ghost's watchful eyes tracking my every move. I began to fear that by delving too deeply, I might awaken forces far beyond my control. Yet, every fiber of my being screamed that I could not abandon Eleanor to the silence of the attic forever. I had to remember her. I had to set her spirit free. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind me, the same slow, measured thuds from earlier, echoed again from the staircase. I backed away from the desk, journal in trembling grip, as the sound became nearer, and then paused right at the threshold of the study. My pulse raced, and for a frozen moment, the world seemed to slow. Then, as if in response to my silent plea, the door behind me creaked open. I spun around and caught sight of the ghostly figure emerging from the shadow of the corridor, its hollow eyes fixed upon me with an intensity that cut through the darkness. There was no malice in its gaze, only an overwhelming, unfulfilled longing for recognition and resolution. The figure's voice, now clear as crystal in my mind, murmured, "I'm so tired. Please, help me remember." The plea resonated through me, echoing the quiet sorrow that I had felt in the cold touch against the wall. I whispered in response, "I will not let you fade away. I'll remember, I promise." The specter's form wavered, as though caught between existence and oblivion. I felt an almost tangible weight lifting from the room as the ghost's features softened. For a moment, the oppressive dread eased, replaced by an inexplicable compassion. I reached out toward the figure, but as my fingers neared the ephemeral form, it dissipated like smoke in the wind, leaving only a fading echo of its desperate call. In that silence, I understood that the entity's message was not to instill terror, but to remind me of the human cost of forgotten history. With the journal clutched tight and a determination to uncover Eleanor's truth, I left the attic and returned to the living room. My hands still shook as I sat at the dining table, surrounded by documents and clippings that painted a tragic tapestry of love, betrayal, and loss spanning over a century. The storm raged on outside, but within me, a quiet resolve took root. I spent hours piecing together Eleanor's story from scraps of old records, family anecdotes long buried under time, and the raw confessions of a heartache so deep it echoed in every creak of my home. I learned that she had been silenced by those who feared her scandalous beauty and fierce passion, a woman whose memory was deliberately erased. It seemed the house itself had been complicit in keeping her secret hidden, only now demanding that someone acknowledge the truth. By the time dawn broke, pale light streamed through the windows, and the oppressive atmosphere began to recede. I had gathered enough evidence to honor her memory. I printed out clippings, transcribed parts of the old diary passages, and even made a promise to myself to share her story with anyone who would listen. As I set my things in order, I felt one last, soft whisper brush past my ear, a gentle thank you, or perhaps a plea for forgiveness, echoing in the quiet morning air. Even now, as I write these words in the safety of daylight, I can't shake the lingering presence of that night. I still hear faint footsteps in the attic on stormy evenings. Sometimes I catch myself glancing upward, wondering if Eleanor's gaze still follows me, silently urging me to remember her story, and the haunting truth that every home, every old relic, carries the weight of forgotten souls. I've since moved on and left that house behind, but the memory of that night remains etched into my very being. In our modern lives, we often dismiss the quiet spaces of our past, the dark corners of memory. But sometimes, in the stillness of a stormy night, when the only sound is that of a lonesome heartbeat and the soft thumps from above, we are reminded that everything has a history. And sometimes, what watches from the attic is not here to harm us. It is here to be remembered. I will carry Eleanor's story with me always, as a reminder to honor every lost voice and to listen closely to the whispers in the dark. For in remembering, we might just set the restless souls free, and in doing so, perhaps finally find peace for ourselves. The watching in the attic is my testament to the eerie truth that even in our solitude, the past will always find a way to reach us. And as long as there are secrets hidden in the rafters, someone, somewhere, is watching.